Hi, I want to thank the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship for inviting me to present, especially as a celebration of the life of Tom Renier, who passed earlier this year. I think we all agree Tom was one of the nicest and smartest people we've ever met, and he will be missed. What I'm doing today is a part of my professional life, and I normally present to engineering managers in Silicon Valley from Asia, Europe, and North America. And here's the semiconductor industry. Oops, let me turn this on. The semiconductor industry is an unusual one. It's high tech, but it's different. High tech is already very fast. Semiconductor is even faster. What you see here, the big building, is a Samsung fab in Korea. Costs over $7 billion. And it's something that's just, it's an amazing thing. In semiconductor, we make the machines that take the silicon wafers that make the chips for your iPhone and other things. And process engineers are people who have to innovate and think differently out of the box. So that's the area I worked in, and one of the things I did is I helped newly promoted and newly hired engineering managers in the area of high performance thinking and innovation, how the mind works, how it creates blind spots to the truth, how to overcome limitations, how to think in ways nobody else has thought of before. And so what I'm going to present today has some scholarly research behind it, especially my master's project on this topic, conscious use of the adaptive unconscious to enhance self-efficacy and change adaptability. What that simply means is having a strong sense that you can make things happen, you can set stretch goals, and you can achieve things, and also adapt in a changing environment. It's such a crazy atmosphere that engineers and others in this environment have to learn how to walk moving ice floes. It's crazy. The last book on this list, Strangers to Ourselves, Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious, is a key book to understand some of the stuff I'm going to do today. Everything is in a book of mine called Creating Your Life. If you like what you hear today, you can go pretty deep into this. I'm going to cover about 15% of what I cover for engineering managers. It's a topic that I love and I'm excited about, so I'm going to end up talking very quick. So I'm glad this is being recorded because you may want to go back to it. What we're going to explore together today is rocks in your head. Are there things in your head that are getting in your way of seeing the truth, of seeing things differently and innovating? We're also going to talk about something called the reticular activating system. This is a network of cells in your head that its purpose is to create blind spots. We're also going to talk about the subconscious mind and the adaptive unconscious. We're talking about different parts of the mind. It's actually one thing. It's kind of all baked together, but I'm going to artificially separate the pieces and walk you through it and show how this relates to authorship questions, orthodox scholars, and how they respond to the kind of things we present. So here are some propositions. Your mind holds blind spots to the truth. You don't act according to the truth, but according to the truth you believe is absolute and certain. Your mind has the ability, quite literally, to keep you blind to evidence that stares you in the face. Your mind powerfully protects your self-image, your identity, from anything that threatens it, especially the truth. Certain behaviors can reveal to you that you have blind spots. And I discovered this early in my research. I published an article almost 20 years ago now, Shakespeare's Knowledge of Law, Journey Through the History of the Arguments. When I was studying and reading an English barrister named Sir George Greenwood. And Sir George wrote a book called The Shakespeare Problem Restated, in which he didn't know who wrote the plays, but he did question the current attribution and was marshaling the evidence. And he did it like a lawyer. And he made it's an incredible book, has lots of good arguments, and it's something that begs to be answered. One person who answered that was J.M. Robertson in his book, The Baconian Heresy. Even though Greenwood wasn't necessarily a Baconian, Robertson put in that context. And reading him and reading his responses, you begin to realize that Greenwood is a hard person to answer. In fact, All the way up into the 60s and even to the present day, George W. Keaton, who's also a lawyer, wrote a book, and it's the same kind of thing. They have a hard time dealing with what Greenwood actually says. In fact, what's interesting about Keaton is when he's not thinking of authorship, he has incredible things to say about Shakespeare's knowledge of law and politics and other things. But as soon as he thinks authorship, then he changes on a dime and starts undercutting his own arguments. It's a fascinating thing, and it was a fascination for me, especially given the professional work I do. And so one of the things about Shakespeare scholars, people who set themselves up as experts, there's something here to question, and I want to tell you a story about Cliff Young. This happened back in the 80s in Australia. Every year in Australia, they have a marathon from Sydney to Melbourne, and it's about a 600-kilometer marathon, so it goes on for days. In those days, I think it was like 6-7 days long. And you know what marathoners look like, the professional ones, how they're dressed up in nice suits, and they have coaches, and they do everything. Well, one day this guy in his 60s, Cliff Young, shows up in Oshkosh overalls and galoshes. And they kind of look at him because he looked like a derelict, that he had stumbled into the wrong place. And they asked him why he was here, and he says, well, I'm here to run the marathon. And, you know, really, have you trained? And he says, well, I have a station, a farm. I have some sheep. I have some cattle. I don't have a horse, but I run around, you know, to get them moved. This is how I train. And they said, well, all right, good luck, old man. And so the marathon started. And Cliff Young, he had just kind of a slow, shuffling gait, nothing unusual. Now, the professional marathoners worked with experts, and the experts told them to do a marathon that goes for 6 or 7 days. You have to run 18 hours and sleep 6, more or less. Run 18 hours, sleep 6. This is how you optimize the ability to run and complete such a marathon. Well, Cliff did not have experts teaching him, and not only did he win the race, he cut a day and a half off the record time. And you can go read articles about it. He was a sensation in Australia. What happened was Cliff just knew he was supposed to run, so he just kept shuffling along at this slow pace while all the expert-trained marathoners were sleeping. Occasionally he'd catch an hour nap, and then he'd get up and just keep going again. And this tells you something about experts. And this is kind of, you know, in the words of Richard Feynman, the great inventor of quantum chromodynamics and one of the finest lecturers at Caltech, and I strongly urge anyone to go to YouTube and watch his videos. He says, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Now, this came up just a few weeks ago in a Don't Quill the Messenger podcast when Stephen was interviewing Dr. Roger Strittmatter, who talked about the cult of experts, how they can have this kind of insular view of things. He also talked about the Stratfordian Trust and believed that, you know, they believe that we are threatening their livelihood, and they're right, we are. But we're threatening more than their livelihood, we're threatening their fundamental identity. And I want to kind of clue you into how that process works and why it's important to understand, especially for Oxfordian scholars. And by the way, Feynman was the scientist that was with NASA experts when the Challenger disaster occurred. The Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. And on YouTube, you can find a video where Feynman is with the NASA experts, and they're talking about O-rings, and the NASA experts are saying, well, the low temperature at launch had really nothing to do with it. This little O-ring, which kept certain chemicals from mixing, which would cause the explosion. They didn't think it failed. So during a break, Feynman, who's a very practical scientist but also an engineer and didn't believe experts, he had a glass of ice water, dropped the O-ring in, brought it out, squeezed it, and it lost all of its resiliency. So he comes back in, and you can see this on YouTube, and just tells people what he did. He just demonstrated in a moment that the O-rings would fail if the temperature is freezing. So think about that. Anybody who talks about experts, relying on experts, or they talk about consensus of experts. We're not talking science. Okay, we're going to talk about blind spots to the truth. This is, some of you may have seen this in a psychology class. If you look inside that, read what's in the triangle for a second. And, most people read that and they see Paris in the spring. That's not what it says. Look again. If you're seeing Paris in the spring, I'm telling you that's not what you're seeing. If you look closely, it actually says Paris in the spring. Okay, here's another one. And this is a short little video. Let's see, I'm going to run it really quickly here. There's no audio, so it's not a big deal. And some of you may have seen this before, but even if you did, oops, let me go back. Can we go back one? Oh, I have the control, yes. There we go. Let me try again. Let me see if I can hit that. There we go. This is called the monkey business illusion. So essentially, you're going to see some players wearing white and black uniforms. They're going to pass the ball, and you're going to count the number of times the players in white pass the ball. Okay. So yeah, there were 16 passes, and half the people who see this did not spot the gorilla. Okay? And if you've seen this before, and some people have, all right, did you notice that the curtain changed color, and when the gorilla entered, a black player left? This is what happens when you focus. And by the way, this is what magicians know, and this is what misdirection is all about. Now watch this again. You're focused on the players. Here comes a gorilla in the middle of your screen, and you do not see it. Okay? It's an amazing thing to see. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go on from there. Boop, boop, boop. And I have one more. Read this sentence to yourself, and just for a minute, read it one time to yourself. Okay, read it again and count the letters F. Count the number of F's in that sentence. Okay. If you're like most people, you'll see 2 or 3 F's, okay? These are the F's that everybody sees in finished files and scientific. Now, if you are with somebody, don't give them the answer. There are 7 F's in that sentence, and if you only see 3 F's, I'm telling you there are 7, and you're not even seeing it, even though I'm telling you that. Okay? There are 7 F's in that. Can you find them? Would you be amazed to think that I'm telling you what's in front of your eyes and you still can't see it? Look at the 4 ofs. There are 7 F's in that sentence. When I do this with engineering managers, by this time I have them. If you're in HR or learning and development, you got about 10 minutes in front of an engineering audience to get their attention, otherwise they're gone. They don't care what you have to say. In the first 10 minutes of these presentations, I get inside their head and talk about a mechanism inside their head that I know exists that they don't, and I have them for the rest of the week. So this brings up a few questions. How are blind spots created? Do I have blind spots that limit or control me, my imagination, or my scholarly work? How can I discover and overcome my blind spots? How can I avoid creating blind spots? How can I recognize blind spots in other people? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. First, I want to introduce you to the reticular activating system. This is a network of cells in the middle of your brain. Now, I'm using some synecdoche here. It's a rhetorical term about a part for the whole reticular activating system. There's more stuff involved, but this keeps it simple. The reticular activating system works with sensory input, what you see, hear, and feel. At any given moment, you have 11 million pieces of input sensory data, and if your conscious mind had to deal with it, it would drive you nuts, okay? So the reticular activating system, its job, it controls sleeping, waking, and your attention, your consciousness, where your focus is. It works as a sophisticated filter, and its job is to create blind spots to the junk in your sensory life. So it acts like an executive secretary to the CEO, okay, who knows what's important to the CEO and only lets those communications come through or those appointments take place that matter to the CEO. Your brain, your conscious mind is the CEO. It allows you to focus on what you value. It also allows you to perceive a threat. So anything you value or see as a threat gets through. So if I'm reading a book, if I'm into a good novel, everything sensorily around me is irrelevant. I'm in that world of books. So slowly it'll start cutting out anything. I won't hear things happen, okay? If somebody calls me to dinner, I'm not going to hear it. Sometimes if they call my name, that might get through. But since I'm not valuing anything but the book I'm reading, I'm lost in that world. And this is what this reticular activating system does. Okay, this is also important. This is what new mothers discover. A new mother can sleep through the airplane going overhead, the truck going by, the alarm going off. But the moment that baby whimpers, wakes right up. That's important. It gets through. If you have a neighbor's dog that barks all night, it's keeping you up. That's because you hear it as a threat. How can the neighbor sleep through it? Well, the neighbor can sleep through because they don't see it as a threat. It's okay for them. I'm going to skip this and go right to the next part. It also supports you when you set goals, especially if you set goals that you don't know how to achieve. Like, how do I make an iPhone touch where I can just like scroll through things with my finger? We don't know how to do that. Well, you got to invent the way. So you set the goal. The reticular activating system sees that it's valued, and that gets through. What you value gets through. Let me give you an example of something. When you think about it, like when you're reading a book, begin, go to sleep, focus on work, this thing will kick in. You have to decide who or what do you value, who or what do you not value. And what happens when you do not respect a differing opinion of a colleague, even an orthodox Shakespearean scholar? Let me tell you about the CIA and the reticular activating system, and this relates directly to the founding of the Oxfordian movement. Herbert Meyer worked for the CIA under Ronald Reagan, and he said there's a special talent needed to avoid intelligence failures, the ability to spot a pattern with the fewest possible facts. Now, at that time, CIA analysts were telling the president that the Soviet Union economy was growing at 3%. It's a good, like ours, it's a growing economy. But Reagan, Casey, the head of the CIA, and Meyer, they did not believe it. That there was something wrong, and they wanted proof of it. So they went to the senior CIA guys. They had no interest in the question, but the younger guys were willing to look. So the question to them is, what would we look for if the Soviet economy was going to collapse? What would be valuable information to have? So they made a highly technical list of what our spies should look for. Sent it to our spies, our allies, and they set that goal, which opened up the reticular activating system so that people could see what was valued, and it changed their perceptions of things. One of the things, some data came in, but I'll give you just one example. A Moscow train carrying meat to distant manufacturing city was robbed by workers, but the army was told to back off, catching and punishing the workers. Meat shortages were everywhere. They were being realized, and they started accumulating this evidence. The spies were asked, why wasn't this reported before? Well, we didn't know you were looking for it. It didn't fit into anything. And because you asked the question, now we can see the data and send it on as valuable. So, first rule of intelligence, know what you're looking for. And J. Thomas Loney did this, okay? This looks familiar. Soviet Union economy is strong. Assume it's not. Make a list of what indicates a weak economy. Go look for evidence. Examine the new evidence and make sense of the data. Conclusion, Soviet economy is going to collapse. Well, Shakespeare of Stratford wrote the plays. Well, did he? Assume someone else wrote it. Make a list of the unknown writer's characteristics. Go look for evidence. Examine the new evidence and make sense of the data. Looney, Edward de Vere wrote the plays. Okay, I'm going fast because I'm excited, and I'm only covering 15% of the material I cover for engineers, but I'm still going to get through a lot. Let's talk about the conscious mind and the subconscious repository. By the way, we all know we have a subconscious mind. How many of you take it into account in your daily life? Hopefully after today, you may take it into account more. This is what happens when we consciously deal with with the world. We perceive something and we connect it to our experience. Here's the thing running toward me. It's a Rottweiler. Oh yeah, I had an experience with a Rottweiler before. It wasn't good. I don't want to be here when it arrives, so I'm out of here. Okay? Consciously, that's what we do. In the beginning, maybe consciously, when you were learning how to drive, everything was freaking you out because you had to press the gas, you had to hit the brake, you had to look around for things. Consciously, that was a challenge in the beginning. Over time, it wasn't a challenge. Why not? Well, because of the subconscious repository. The subconscious repository is a machine. It automatically stores repeated patterns, habits, and preferences. Whatever you do over and over again gets stored in your subconscious mind and is made automatic. So if I learn how to type, I can consciously type up to 20 words a minute by knowing what keys to go, but at a certain point, I have to repeat enough so my subconscious takes over, it co-ops it, and suddenly I can go even faster because I'm not thinking about everything I'm typing. It gets stored. Same with habits, like smoking. If I smoke enough, pretty soon I'm into the habit of the smoking. Preferences, I like broccoli, I don't like cauliflower, whatever it is. If I say it long enough, it gets stored and made automatic. This also happens to our self-image. Whatever you say about yourself, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person, I have these preferences, I am this, I am that. That also gets stored and is made automatic. If in second grade I take some kind of standardized test and it says, oh, Mark, yeah, the test shows that you're weak in math. Well, we're going to put you on a creative writing track. So I'm weak in math. Thanks for letting me know. I might have tried. And I can store that as a self-image, especially from an authority who gives it to me. And the thing is, and this is what the research shows, and it's amazing, there's a part of our mind that later on, if I do well on a math test, will I say, hey, I'm good at math? No, I will say it's a fluke, it's an accident, it's not like me, I'm weak in math. And there's a part of your mind that will automatically adjust to reality so that the next time you take a math test, it will require you to answer some questions wrong to fit the picture that you got stored. Same is true of reality, how you observe the world, people, the environment, the meaning of life, whatever it is, that gets stored as well. It's a very powerful thing. Patterns get stored, what you repeat gets stored. So what is it that you say about yourself over and over again? Oh, I'm not good at remembering names. Oh, I'm not good at remembering names. Your subconscious takes note and stores it and will make sure that you're not good at remembering names. So, are there rocks in your head? What prevents you from seeing or behaving differently? Your abilities, your achievements, your attitudes, habits, self-image, past, future, view of other Oxfordians, view of orthodox Shakespearean scholars. Do you have rocks in your head that are preventing you from seeing truth because they've been stored automatically in your subconscious? How does that work specifically? The adaptive unconscious. It has a very particular job. Most things get stored consciously because we don't want to have to deal with remembering how to open a door and walk through it, so it gets stored. So instead, we have this thing called the adaptive unconscious that operates actively between the conscious mind and the subconscious repository. Its job is to match pictures. If I have this stored picture of myself, I'm weak at math. But in the outside conscious world, something happens that shows me something that contradicts, and there's a difference in picture, what's stored and what's happening. Some people would call it cognitive dissonance, but it's more than that. Its job is to make sure the picture matches. And if I don't somehow convince myself that maybe I can be good at math, then my behavior, my performance in the world adjusts to match the picture and prove to me again on a bad math test I take later that, yeah, I'm weak in math. That's its job. It's a spin doctor. It also maintains truth. What you believe is true. It doesn't matter what the truth is. What do you believe the truth is? Especially if you're emotionally convinced that this is true about me, this is true about reality, this is true about those people. Oh, you know how the French are, you know how the Germans are. What about the South Koreans? If you have some kind of truth about any cultural group or any group of people, it can get in your way of dealing with individuals. It has a strong bias towards making us feel good. Its job is to make sure the pictures match. So the question is, what do you have stored that you don't even know is there? What was told to you by professors, by people you respect that got stored? What do you say to yourself over and over again? What is the words you're saying to yourself in your head? What is your self-talk? It also creates motivation because, okay, right now I'm not an engineer, but I could be an engineer. So if I can see a picture of me being an engineer, if I hold on to that picture and act like it's a stored picture of me, the adaptive unconscious creates motivation for me to go to school, do the work, and get to the degree so that the picture will match. In other words, it will help you adapt the other way as well. Okay? What time is it? Ooh, I'm going fast. Okay, I'll slow down just a little bit and tell you some stories. Once I was called up. I'm a piano player. And I played on stage. I participated in some recordings. Once I was called up for a seminar that was 6 months away in another city, and I was asked to get a choir together and come and conduct a choir. I had never conducted a choir in my life. And I said, sure, I'll do it. Because I'm the kind of person that knows, I know about the reticular activating system, I know about the adaptive unconscious. I also know I just had barely enough that they wouldn't have asked me unless they saw something in me that said, maybe you can do this. So I immediately got on the phone with some people. Hey, I'm going to conduct a choir. Do you want to sing in it? People I knew who could perform. I started putting it together, but there was still a problem. I didn't know how to conduct a choir. I remember being in a used bookstore in Sacramento, California, and I was going to the science fiction section to buy a novel or something. I happened to pass through the music section, and something caught my eye, and it's like, wait, what? And I looked down, and it was a book on the bottom shelf, How to Conduct a Choir. Now, in any other world, I would never have seen that book, but because my reticular activating system was open, because I was goal-oriented, anything that will support me gets through. By the way, this is how networking works. If you want to have somebody, if you have a goal, let other people know your goal. And if they have that, it'll get through them and they'll send it to you, especially if they value your friendship. So I also asked people, hey, I read that book, that helped a lot. Do you know anybody that's conducted a choir? Well, somebody said, well, we know this person, they were a vocal coach once, they were in a choir. So I got that person in the choir and she helped teach me to do it. And 6 months later, we performed 3 pieces of music, it went great. And I became officially a choir conductor and immediately resigned. But the thing is, I knew enough at that time, and this is one of the things I help other people understand, is you set goals that you don't know how to achieve. For example, I put myself through college working at a 7-Eleven store, and being a piano player and having no money, I wanted a piano in my house. But I couldn't buy one, I couldn't rent one. So what did I do? I said, okay, I'm setting the goal. I'm going to have a piano in my house. I don't know how yet, but I set the goal. And then it occurred to me, you know, there are people that have pianos. They never use them, and they may be in the way. They may not want to give them away, but they might let me want to store it. In fact, I bet you there are people with 2 pianos, and that's just one too many. So they wouldn't be out of piano. I bet they would be able to let me move one into my house and keep it and store it for them. So I started asking every customer at this 7-Eleven store, you wouldn't happen to have an extra piano that you wouldn't mind me storing for you because I'm a piano player? It only took 2 weeks. This one gentleman, regular customer, looked at me and he said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do have a piano. I don't want to get rid of it, but my wife doesn't want it in the house, so I think it'd be great. So I got a friend's truck. We went over there. He had this beautiful Spin-It piano from the 1920s. It was a tabletop piano. Then he had this big black upright Baldwin piano. And I'm looking at the Baldwin, how am I going to get that in this little truck? And he said, no, you get to take the Spin-It piano. And really, okay. So we got it in. I had it for 4.5 years. It was amazing before he wanted it back. When I moved in with my wife in the Bay Area, I didn't have a piano. Well, I want a piano. I was able to, somebody allowed me to move one in for 15 years. When we moved a few years ago up to the Sierra foothills, I didn't have a piano, and we were in a big house, and I'm looking and I'm saying, gosh, there's enough room here for a grand piano. I haven't even gotten to the point of asking people. Within a month, somebody texted me and says, hey, I can't think of a better person to give my mom's grand piano to. Do you want it? So one of the things that you learn is that you set goals that you have no idea how to achieve, and you start bypassing some of the blind spots that can happen in your head. So, a little review on the adaptive unconscious. It's like the autopilot on a boat. Think of it this way. Okay, you're on a lake and you're fishing, and you set the autopilot to very slowly go north. Okay, and nothing's happening. So you decide, oh, okay, I want to go east instead. So you go up to the wheel and you turn the boat and you start heading east. This is what willpower is, by the way. Use willpower to override the system. Then you let go and go back to fishing. What happens? Well, you start going back north again, okay? Because you have this image, you have something programmed in, and the adaptive conscious, its job is to make sure you're going with what's stored. So the question is, what's inside of you that's overriding your willpower? For example, I smoked cigarettes for 8 years, 2 packs a day. I love smoking. But there was a point, obviously, this is not a healthy thing to do. And of course, I quit. You know, I overrode the system. But the moment you know, I still craved a cigarette, and I even continued smoking if I smoked 1 cigarette. So what did I do? At a certain point, I realized, oh, I have to go in and change what's stored. So my goal was to be a non-smoker. Okay, I'm a non-smoker. And I started acting like a non-smoker. I imagined that there was no smoke in the air, that even when I was smoking, there was no cigarette in my hands. I started cultivating the attitudes and habits of a non-smoker. Ooh, you know, smoking is like licking an ashtray, and you know, it's in your clothes, it's disgusting. And it took about 6 months, but there was a certain point where the old one came up, and when that old picture comes up, it likes to hang on. So there was a time when I was craving cigarettes even more. But at a certain point, I hung in there. Then I woke up one day, and it was like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. And I went through about 3 days of physical withdrawal and other kind of things. But after that, I have never smoked a cigarette, and I have never craved a cigarette, for the simple reason that non-smokers don't crave cigarettes. In other words, the problem for many people when they want to change something that's stored is the fact that they are trying to override the system, not the stored picture. And so if I see myself as a smoker but I quit smoking, I'm going to crave it. So that's one of the things we need to do. Find out what the rocks are, how do we get them out, and how do we open ourselves up. So here's what you can do. You observe yourself. There are signs that you're keeping yourself in a box, and one way is absolute statements. Do you talk this way? When I work with teams in Silicon Valley, I'll just go to their meetings and listen to them talk. And whenever I hear anybody talk in terms of absolute statements, I know right away these people could have blind spots to anything that contradicts what they absolutely believe, okay? So language like everyone knows that he's always like this. They never do it that way. There's no use in doing it that way. We've always done it this way. In other words, they lock on to something. And when you lock on, you lock out. So does locking on to an absolute truth blind you? There was a 2008 study, attitude certainty. When you absolutely know something's true, it increases all resistance to persuasion. If the problem is being absolute, you cross the line and you will create rocks in your head just by being absolute. How else do you do it? All right, lock on, lock out. I know this is true, lock on. Evidence to the contrary gets locked out, okay? True scholars do not lock on. Truth seekers do not lock on. So what is it that you lock onto? What is it that you absolutely know is true and you won't hear anything else? Okay, one of the ways of discovering if you have rocks in your head, blind spots in any endeavor, is emotional triggers. Somebody brings up a topic or somebody brings up a person and you go, that right there indicates a blind spot. And often, this is why it's used in advertising. They like to program things into you. You know, hey, if you buy our beer, you could be on the beach and the women will rise up out of the sand and dance and love you, you know, things like that. This imagery plays over and over. Trust me, advertisers know that you have a subconscious repository and an adaptive unconscious. And so they will frame things in such a way to put certain images in your head to get implanted so your behavior starts changing, you know, according to what profits them. Same with politicians, you know, this is how propaganda works. If I can, before you hear somebody or talk to them, demonize them in a certain way and make them evil or whatever, I can plant an emotional trigger inside of you that you don't even know is there. That functions like a landmine. This is why I don't talk to politics with anybody anymore, for the simple reason is most people have landmines and they don't even know it, and they blow up and it becomes a mess. By the way, no political party will have me because this is a problem for everybody. But the point is, if you're investigating yourself and you want to know where your blind spots are, look for that emotional trigger. Look for, you know, that kind of thing with people, data, reality, whatever it is. Also, if you have blind spots, it makes it so easy to slide into ad hominem personal attacks, the power of ridicule. Do you speak that language? Have you picked it up from other people? Do you have this tendency to want to ridicule others? Wherever that tendency lies, it's a good sign that you have a blind spot. And even for Oxfordians, orthodox Shakespeare scholars can make good points. Don't demonize them. They can have something that, a piece to the puzzle that you may miss otherwise. Detachment versus emotional attachment. Learning how to be detached. True scholars, truth seekers, detach themselves, all right? If you attach yourself too much to something, especially if you make it part of your livelihood, that's a good way of it creating blind spots. Gosh, if I go down this path, it may affect my ability to support my family. It can be a disaster. Same with my reputation. This is why there's people, academics in universities, professors, who are very sympathetic to an Oxfordian understanding of Shakespeare, but they're not going to come out with it publicly. They're not going to, you know, because of peer pressure. Their reputation could suffer. And some people just don't. It takes an extraordinary person to hang in there with the truth at every level. So when you engage in scholarly work, develop a scholarly detachment. Beware of identifying your work. I remember over maybe 12, 15 years ago being at a Shakespeare Studies conference up in Oregon, and there was one presenter making a case for something that pretty much was based on the understanding of one word. And early on in the presentation, somebody audience corrected him, said, wait a minute, that's not what that word meant at that time. This is what it means. And it totally blew up the person's presentation. If that had been me, I think I probably would honestly said, well, thank you very much. Sorry to waste your time. And I would have graciously bowed out. This person couldn't do it. They were so wrapped up in their discovery that they kind of frenetically went to the end. It was sad to see. But this is what happens if you attach yourself too much to your original work. Absolute certainty is your enemy. Absolute certainty is your enemy. Anything you say you absolutely know is true, that in and of itself is enough to do something in your mind to make sure you don't see any evidence contrary to what you absolutely know is true. When you lock on, you lock out. Be careful what you're locking onto in your life. As an Oxfordian scholar, cultivate a habit in being at maximum 95% certain. Me, I'm 95% certain that Edward de Vere is the author of the plays. That's as far as I'm willing to go, 95%, because so much evidence is underground. We're just seeing peaks of things, and we're trying to connect dots. But a certain piece of evidence can shift things, and if I'm going to see that evidence, I have to just come short of being absolutely certain and keep that scholarly detachment. Even though I've written about it, even though I advocate it, there's a part of me that knows something tomorrow could give me a completely different understanding. So I'm always open to new evidence and new arguments. And that, for me, is the definition of a true scholar. Understand that your subconscious repository stores anything repeated. Your thoughts create a reality in a very significant way. Not in terms of just your habits and attitudes and preferences, but your fundamental identity. Who are you? Anything that you have completely invested in for your identity or the nature of reality, the more you lock onto that, the more you say certain things, they get stored. So if you want to have an interesting time into yourself and you want to explore new possibilities, start questioning everything, at least open doubt. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe somebody else has some understanding that I don't have. It could serve you well if you're a truth seeker. So, in the spirit of Richard Feynman, to all Oxfordian scholarship is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Beware of becoming an expert. By the way, there are two types of people in this world: those who can extrapolate from incomplete data. That's for the engineers in the audience. By the way, if you want to see deeper, go deeper into this is the book I give the engineers, Creating Your Life. It's also written as a public version of it, not an engineer's version. You can go to my Shakespeare authorship source book. I have a source book because I'm a strong believer in going to original sources rather than relying just on people's interpretations. If you want to see things other people aren't seeing, go back and read the originals. I have a slew of links to PDFs or placed on websites that have a lot of Elizabethan links as well as more recent things. That's at sourcetext.com/sourcebook. You can go to my website, marcandrealexander.com. There's a contact page. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And with that, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.